Metroid is one of Nintendo's longest running franchises, yet has paled in popularity when compared to the likes of The Legend of Zelda and Mario. But with the launch of Metroid Dread, that may soon change, and in order to prepare ourselves for Samus's latest adventure, we've got some facts for you. I'm Caboose with the Leaderboard, and this is 107 Metroid facts that you should know. Metroid's hero, Samus Aran, is a woman. That's not really a surprising or interesting fact, but did you know how that came to be? Turns out during development on the original Metroid, one of the staff members said, hey, wouldn't it be kinda cool if it turned out that the person inside the suit was a woman? The idea was accepted, and gaming history was made. Metroid wasn't the original name for the game. During development, the game was called Space Hunter, a term which is used in the manual in place of Bounty Hunter. As for how the name Metroid was chosen, the name is a portmanteau of the words Metro and Android. Metro was chosen because much of the game takes place underground, while Android was used because Samus' suit kinda made her look like a robot. The Japanese version of Metroid was released for the Famicom Disk System, which meant that players could save their progress. The Disk System wasn't released in North America, which meant Nintendo had to implement a password system in order for players to save their game. If you put in the password Justin Bailey, you would unlock nearly every power-up in the game and be able to play as Samus in a pink leotard. Justin Bailey doesn't have any significance, despite some fan theories. On that note, only the North American version of Metroid has the end screen with Samus in her underwear. Samus's iconic morph ball was created because designers couldn't create a good-looking crawling animation. Since the world already featured a number of tiny passages, they simply had her turn into a ball. Metroid's level design was influenced by Samus's speed. Developers thought she moved too slow, but increasing her speed made it difficult to navigate. The solution was to increase the size of levels, creating the sprawling world we know today. Metroid was heavily inspired by the 1979 film Alien, specifically the creature design of H.R. Giger, one of the game's main villains. Ridley was even named after Alien's director, Ridley Scott. The final boss of Metroid is Mother Brain, and due to the layout of the world, Mother Brain is located directly above Samus' starting point in the game. The Metroid's home planet, SR-388, is named after a motorcycle engine, specifically the SR-400 Yamaga series. However, the engines don't run at 400cc, they run at 388cc, thus creating the name of the planet. In the 1989 cartoon Captain N, the Game Master, a show about a teenager transported to a universe based around video games, the main antagonist is Mother Brain. Apart from the name and the fact that she resides on an asteroid base called Metroid, Mother Brain bears next to no resemblance to her video game counterpart.
Without Captain N to help you, you haven't got a chance!
Mother Brain is voiced by Levi Stubbs, who is better known as the lead vocalist of Motown group The Four Tops. The R&B group was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame 1 year after the premiere of Captain N. While Samus doesn't appear in Captain N, she does in the comics based on it. She is the love interest for the main character and has a personality that is very different from how she behaves in the Metroid games. Fortunately, the comics aren't canon to anything. Though Metroid sold well in North America, it didn't sell particularly well in Japan. This is probably because the game required the Famicom Disk System to be playable in Japan, which less than half of all Famicom owners purchased. Metroid 2 Samus Returns was created to capitalize on Western sales, and was overseen by Game Boy creator Gunpei Yokoi. Because the Game Boy only had black and white graphics, developers redesigned Samus' suit in order for players to tell them apart visually. This is what led to Samus' Varia suit gaining prominent shoulder pads. Speaking of the Varia suit, the name is a mistranslation. In Japanese, it's called the Barrier suit. The name has stuck, however. Though Samus is meant to exterminate all Metroid life, in Samus Returns, a Metroid imprints onto her after hatching and she is unable to kill it. Metroid creator Yoshio Sakamoto was very moved by this ending, so much so that he was heavily influenced by it when creating Super Metroid. Despite 2 games in the series, Metroid didn't sell as much as Nintendo would have liked, which delayed development on Super Metroid. Development took a further 2 years once it began, and the game was nearly cancelled 3 times by Nintendo during its production. Much of Nintendo's concern was the fact that, at the time, Super Metroid would be the biggest cartridge game ever made, its total size around 3 megabytes. Super Metroid is the first game in the series that lets Samus shoot in 8 directions. Before, Samus couldn't fire diagonally. The boss Kraid was a boss in the original Metroid, but in Super Metroid he is much larger. Players speculated that he grew, but this was later retconned by Nintendo in Metroid Zero Mission in order to keep Kraid's size consistent. Super Metroid features a number of friendly creatures that assist Samus, such as the monkey-like Edecuns. They demonstrate how to wall jump in a room that can only be exited through wall jumping. The sound effects for various creatures in the game are directly sampled from various Godzilla monsters. For example, Mother Brain sounds like Mothra and Ridley sounds like Anguirus. Super Metroid is one of the first open-world video games to use a map feature. In-game, it highlights the shape of rooms as well as the location of important items and upgrades. Super Metroid remains one of the most popular speedrunning games of all time. It was highly influential in the speedrunning community and remains a favorite at events like Games Done Quick to this day. Just remember, you should always kill the animals to chase that world record. Please don't take that out of context, as that would sound pretty morbid. We're talking about Super Metroid speedruns, okay? The game also proved to be one of two main influencers behind the Metroidvania genre alongside Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Its open world design, need for backtracking, and permanent upgrades remain a hallmark of Metroidvanias to this day. The main musical theme of Super Metroid was created by composer Kenji Yamamoto by humming while he was riding his motorcycle to and from work. Yamamoto served as the game's composer, sound programmer, and sound effect creator. The complete control over Super Metroid's audio is what enabled him to create the game's acclaimed soundtrack and sound design due to the lack of outside interference. When Samus dies in Super Metroid, her suit breaks and you can see her clothes. This was originally meant to show Samus naked until someone realized that nudity might not be appropriate for a game like this. Samus's appearance outside of the suit was designed to look like Kim Basinger from the erotic romance film 9.5 Weeks, which Sakamoto watched and apparently liked a lot. While critically acclaimed, Super Metroid once again did not sell well in Japan due to its release date in the Super Nintendo lifecycle, as well as the launch of more popular games like Donkey Kong Country. That being said, Sakamoto intended for Super Metroid to be the finale for the series, so the poor sales in Japan did not change that plan. Super Metroid did sell well in North America, however, and has shipped nearly 1.5 million copies worldwide as of 2003. After Super Metroid launched, there would be an 8-year gap between Metroid games, which is the biggest gap in the franchise's history. That wasn't supposed to be the case. A game called Metroid 64 was announced in the pages of Nintendo Power, but nothing ever came of it and it never entered production. According to developers at Nintendo, this was because no one could come up with a concrete idea as to what the game would look like. Metroid Prime was one of several games that the newly formed Retro Studios was tasked with making for the Nintendo GameCube, each of which was targeted for a more mature demographic. In 2000, every other game was cancelled in order to focus on Metroid. Metroid Prime was originally supposed to be a third-person shooter, but after a visit from Shigeru Miyamoto, this was scrapped in favor of a first-person shooter. This was because Miyamoto thought that shooting in the third person wasn't intuitive. Metroid Prime's development took roughly 2.5 years. During the last 9 months of the game's development, staff worked 80 to 100-hour weeks in order to finish it. That's not a fact that I don't think anybody should be really proud of. Nintendo purchased Retro Studios in 2002 after buying out the company's founder. According to insiders, the studio's culture dramatically improved after Nintendo's acquisition. That still didn't stop them from crunching to finish Metroid Prime. Samus was originally supposed to voice the game's opening monologue. That was scrapped in production, though the files are still present within the game. As for who voices Samus, there is some debate as to who it is. The most accepted theory is that it's voice actress Jennifer Hale, who later voiced Commander Shepard in Mass Effect, provided Samus's grunts of pain. Kraid was supposed to appear in Metroid Prime as Retro created a model and textured it. However, the tight development time meant that he was cut from the game. Samus has access to several different types of weapons, such as the Ice Beam. It turns out that if you use the X-ray visor to look at her arm when she changes weapons, she makes a different gesture with her hand in order to make the switch. Though players can unlock hidden endings by acquiring a certain percentage of items, you don't actually need to pick up a lot in order to complete Metroid Prime. Only 21% of the completion is needed to fully complete the game. Metroid Prime released on November 17th, 2002. One day later, another Metroid game was released for the Game Boy Advance, Metroid Fusion. Until the release of Dread, Fusion was the latest game in the Metroid timeline. The same team that created Super Metroid worked on Fusion and was helmed by Metroid's creator Sakamoto. The development team did not go back and check out older Metroid games for programming techniques. Instead, developers used Wario Land 4 as a reference point. Metroid Fusion marked the first time Samus was cloned. This is a result of an X-Parallel parasite that copies her DNA as well as the structure of the various suit, becoming an entity known as SAX. The Japanese version of Metroid Fusion has difficulty settings that are absent from other versions of the game. Easy and normal mode are unlocked from the start, while hard unlocks after beating the game. Owners of both Metroid Prime and Metroid Fusion can unlock new features in Prime by using the Nintendo GameCube Game Boy Advance cable. Samus's fusion suit can be unlocked in Metroid Prime by using the cable, provided players complete Prime. It offers no benefits besides the color scheme change. Conversely, if players beat Metroid Fusion and use the cable, they can play through the original Metroid. Metroid Fusion is the first 2D Metroid to feature animated cutscenes that tell the game's story. Metroid Fusion is also the only game in the series that can be completed with 0% item completion. This is possible due to both glitches and the fact that major item upgrades do not count towards percentage. Fusion was followed up with Metroid Zero Mission, which is a remake of the original Metroid that featured updated visual and gameplay enhancements. Zero Mission is the first game in the series to feature a sequence where Samus must survive without her iconic suit. In this form, she is much more vulnerable to attack and only has a weak pistol to defend herself with. Despite being a remake, Zero Mission features an entirely new explorable area called Chazodia, which also features a new boss and items for pickup. If you use the Game Boy Advance Game Link cable between Metroid Fusion and Metroid Zero Mission, you can unlock the Fusion Picture Gallery. There was a functionality planned between Zero Mission and Metroid Prime 2 Echoes, but that was ultimately scrapped due to time. Metroid Prime 2 is planned to have a hidden version of Super Metroid that would have been unlockable, but as is tradition in the Metroid series, time constraints prevented that from happening. Echoes is the first time in the series to feature a multiplayer mode. Each player controls a different colored various suit and has access to most of Samus's powers from the single-player game. The multiplayer did feature a lock-on system that allowed players to shoot accurately without needing to aim. This wasn't a popular mechanic, and when Echoes was re-released for the Wii as part of the Metroid Prime trilogy, this feature was removed. Two of the boss fights in Echoes against the Spider Ball and Boost Ball Guardians were deemed too difficult by Retro in the game's original release. They were made easier as part of the trilogy package. Echoes launched in November 2004. 3 months before it launched, the game was only 30% complete. Echoes is known for being much harder than Metroid Prime, and there were complaints by fans that the difficulty made the game too tedious at times. Retro listened and made sure that Metroid Prime 3 would be properly balanced on normal difficulty. Did you know Metroid got a pinball game? Well, it did. Released for the DS in 2005, Metroid Prime Pinball is exactly what it sounds like. It is also the first spin-off in Metroid franchise history. The second spin-off was Metroid Prime Hunters. Released for the DS a year after Pinball, Hunters is a much more action-oriented game in comparison to the adventure style of other Metroid games. Hunters is the only game in the series that lacks any appearance from the titular Metroid creatures. Hunters is also the only game in the series to have an ending where Samus dies. Don't worry though, it's not a canon ending, otherwise there wouldn't be other new Metroid games. Metroid Prime 3 Corruption is the only game in the series to be developed with the Nintendo Wii in mind. This of course led to the inclusion of the motion controls in the game. That new control scheme took over a year to fully develop and is the reason why Corruption was delayed several times before its eventual release in 2007. Retro Studios wanted to include bounty hunting side missions in Corruption, but Nintendo ordered the team to drop the idea. This is because Nintendo didn't know that bounty hunters collected a bounty for their hunts, as they thought that bounty hunters were just another way to describe mercenaries. Corruption is the first game in the series to feature full voice acting, though Samus is still silent as per series tradition at that point. When normal enemies are killed in Corruption, their bodies turn black and disintegrate as opposed to fading away like they did in past Prime games. This is apparently done to imply that Samus's weapons are literally burning and deteriorating enemies instead of leaving a body behind like a normal bullet would. Nintendo actually released a special preview channel for Corruption in the Wii shop before the game was released. Players who downloaded it could view exclusive videos that showcase the game's new features as well as its locations. This started a channel trend that would continue for the future of Nintendo releases on the Wii. Metroid Other M is the first game in the series to feature a fully voiced Samus. She is played by voice actress Jessica Martin. Metroid creator Sakamoto, who led development on Other M, also took charge of the English voice direction despite not speaking English. While some new power-ups are gathered the traditional way by finding them in levels, for the most part, Samus gains new powers by having her commanding officer authorizing them for her use. This was a creative way to show that Samus doesn't always lose all the power-ups she picked up in previous games. Nintendo had high expectations for Other M, expecting it to sell millions of copies, but to date it is one of the lowest selling entries in the entire series being one of the few to not crack 1 million sales. Following the release of Other M, Metroid went on an extended hiatus. The next mainline entry in the series would not be released until 2017, but if we're not counting remakes, then the next mainline game in the Metroid series wouldn't come out until this year, 2021. Metroid Prime Federation Force is a Metroid spin-off released in 2016 that marks the first time in the Metroid series where Samus is not the main character. Instead, the co-op first-person shooter puts players in the shoes of Galactic Federation Marines. Upon its reveal, fans reacted negatively to the game's existence. Every trailer for the game on YouTube either features a massive dislike to like ratio, or the like and dislike options have been completely disabled. Federation Force does feature a soccer-style game mode called Blast Ball, where players can shoot balls into nets in order to score points. A free download for the mode was available on the Nintendo eShop, but that has since been taken down. A fan-made remake of Metroid 2 Return of Samus was in development as late as 2016. However, Nintendo filed a DMCA takedown notice that year. Coincidentally, Nintendo announced their own remake of Metroid 2 called Metroid Samus Returns just over a year later. The studio working on the remake at the time, Mercury Steam, originally wanted to remake Metroid Fusion. However, Sakamoto wanted to remake Metroid 2 as it was an important entry in the franchise's canon due to Samus's encounter with a Metroid baby. One of the new gameplay mechanics was a melee parry, which was introduced after the developers implemented a similar parry system when they worked on Castlevania Lord of Shadows, Mirror of Fate. Samus Returns was developed with the 3DS in mind, as the Nintendo Switch had not been released yet, and the former had a much larger install base at the time development began. Samus Returns is the first game in the series to feature amiibo content. If you scan a Metroid figurine, you can unlock reserve energy tanks, a Metroid locator, art gallery, and extra hard difficulty mode, among others. Metroid Prime 4 was announced at Nintendo's E3 Direct in 2017. It was announced nearly 10 years after the release of its predecessor, Metroid Prime 3 Corruption. The game was initially developed by Bandai Namco Studios of Japan and Singapore, with Nintendo stating that the game was developing well in 2018. In January 2019, however, Nintendo announced that development restarted, with Retro Studios once again taking the helm. This marks the first time that a Metroid game was delayed before its release date was announced. Metroid Dread was announced at E3 in 2021, marking the first new 2D side-scrolling Metroid since Metroid Zero Mission. Development is being led by Mercury Steam, with support from Nintendo's Entertainment and Planning Division. Dread was originally conceived as a sequel for Metroid Fusion back in the mid-2000s. The game would have been released for the DS, but struggled to get off the planning phase due to technical limitations. That didn't stop the game from appearing in the official Nintendo magazine with a rumored release date of November 2006. I think they missed that release date by just a little bit. Metroid Prime 3 Corruption includes a scannable space pirate log that references Metroid Project Dread, leading to speculation that it was a reference to the game of the same name. Retro Studios clarifies that this was just a coincidence, before later admitting that the line was actually just a joke. One of the major antagonists will be corrupted EMMI robots that are capable of swiftly killing Samus if she is caught off guard. With that in mind, Metroid Dread includes stealth gameplay for the first time in franchise history. Samus has to sneak past enemies at certain points, with one of her new abilities being the Phantom Cloak that makes her temporarily invisible. Dread will once again feature free aiming and melee attacks, both of which were present in Samus Returns. Importantly, Samus can now execute melee attacks while moving. A new gameplay mechanic in Dread is the grapple hook, which lets Samus climb walls easily. Dread is meant to conclude the story arc that began in the original game, namely the interconnected fate between Samus and the Metroids. How interconnected is it, you ask? Well, during the events of Metroid Fusion, Samus had Metroid injected into her in order to fight off the infection from the X-Parasite, so Samus is actually part Metroid. We'll have to wait and see if Samus's ship will be destroyed in Dread or not. Over the years, Samus has gone through 5 different gunships, though it's not clear if these are entirely new ships or merely redesigns. Metroid has always been more popular outside of Japan, and Dread seems to be following the same formula. According to both GameStop and Amazon, Dread was the most pre-ordered Switch game after E3 2021, beating out the likes of Skyward Sword Remaster and the Pokemon Diamond and Pearl remakes. As for what comes next for Samus, Nintendo has confirmed that Dread will open the door to a new adventure for gaming's most famous bounty hunter. Let's just hope it takes less than a decade for the adventure to come out. And there you have it, 107 facts about Metroid. If you learned something new, be sure to like and subscribe for more factual gaming content. I've been Caboose with the Leaderboard, and we'll see you next time.